This video is sponsored by Card Kingdom. If you want to pre-order some Duskmourn cards, use my link in the description. Hi everyone, I'm Nitsa Hone, and it's Saturday. That means it's time for Nitsa Notes, my weekly vlog series about limited Magic. As usual, in the first Nitsa Notes I do after completing my limited set review, which I've done for Duskmourn, I do a video that's kind of a Cliff's Notes version of the set review, where I talk about the top 3 commons and the best uncommon in each color. Obviously, commons and uncommons are the most important in Limited, so this is an important thing to know. And this is how I see things standing, going into the format in these very, very early stages. I do want to remind you that if you become a channel member or a patron, you get access to a spreadsheet with all of my grades from the set review on it. It's available right now. If you become a channel member or a patron, you can find ways to do those things in the description. All right, let's dive into the look at the best white commons first. So I think the third best white common is kind of a sneaky one. Like when I first saw this card, I was like, this doesn't look very good. The rate just doesn't seem very good. But I think it's going to perform pretty well, and that is Grand Entryway and Elegant Rotunda. So when you look at this card, you can look at each side, and you don't really seem like you're getting enough. Grand Entryway is 2 mana for a 1/1 token, and Elegant Rotunda is 3 mana for 2 counters. You can spread them among 1 or 2 creatures. A card that did either of those individually wouldn't be very good, and when you look at the whole picture here, and you're like 5 mana for a 1/1 and 2+1/+1 counters, that also doesn't sound great. But you do pay for it in installments, and that matters. But the thing that I think really pushes this into a level that it wouldn't be at if it was just any old format is that this can trigger Eerie 3 times, and it does it pretty cheaply. The reason it triggers it 3 times is the Grand Entryway side already just triggers it twice because the Entryway enters, and then the enchantment creature token enters. So that's 2 Eerie triggers right there, and that is significant. And then the other side only costs 3 mana, so you can unlock it on your next turn, get those counters, and trigger Eerie again. So if you draw this late in a lot of white decks, sure, what you get for 5 mana might not seem great, but then when you factor in 3 Eerie triggers, something that really matters for white, like, I think you're going to get way more than your mana's worth out of it. So this card just looks really good. There aren't really very many white decks that don't at least care a little bit about Eerie in the format, so I think this looks quite good. And, I gave it a C+ in the set review. Wouldn't be super shocked if it gets into B- territory where you're thinking about first picking it. I think the second best white common is Trapped in the Screen. So we did just see Banishing Light just be like an okay card in Bloomburrow, but there were a few factors that led to that. One of them is the speed of the format, and right now at least, this format doesn't look as fast as Bloomburrow. But just like Grand Entryway / Elegant Rotunda, there's stuff going on in this format that makes it even better. I mean, it does have Ward too, which also matters. I mean, there is a bunch of incidental enchantment hate in the set, and it would be worse if it didn't have that. But the fact that it is an enchantment is itself, I think, the biggest bonus that you get out of it in this set, because it's a removal that triggers Eerie, and Eerie isn't the only enchantment payoff in this set. It's just the broadest, the one that you see the most. So you can get payoffs for playing it beyond Eerie, but Eerie is the most obvious one. And it's still, 1-for-1 removal. I could see this Grand Entryway Elegant Rotunda room being better than Trapped in the Screen, especially if the format ends up being faster. But for now, at least, I think Trapped in the Screen's a little bit better. And then I think White's best common, and I don't think it's super close, is Unsettling Twins. So we always play a card that's 4 mana for 2 2/2s in Limited. And it's not usually White's best common. You kind of hope it isn't, if that's all it is. But there's just so much going on with this card that makes it way better than our typical 4 mana 2/2 plus another 2/2 card. The first of these is just that Manifest Dread is strong, especially when it's priced like this, where you would be fine getting a 2/2 token, right, for this cost along with the 2/2 body. But you get a 2/2 that's a face-down creature more often than it isn't, and it helps you put a card in the graveyard, which certainly matters. I mean, one of White's decks is a Reanimator deck in this format, so it can help you throw something in the graveyard to reanimate while giving you a 2/2. So just on rate, this is a really good card. It gives you a 2/2 with massive upside along with the other, but then it has synergies in the format. Like I mentioned, you can put a card in the graveyard for Reanimator. It also triggers everything that cares about 2 power or less, which is the red-white aggro theme. The one thing that could end up holding it back, again, if the format ends up being really fast, is just being a 4-drop. Like, Sometimes you can only have so many 4-drops, and maybe this isn't one of the better. I mean, I have a hard time imagining there's that many that are better in white, especially, and certainly not at common. But I have a hard time envisioning a format where this isn't a really, really good card. And then I think white's best uncommon, I mentioned Eerie a bunch, is a card with Eerie, and that is Optimistic Scavenger. This may just end up being the best uncommon in the set. It's going to be in the conversation. And the reason I think that is because you pay 1 mana for this thing, and then there are so many enchantments all over the place in white and in virtually every other color that you're going to get a ton of counters out of this without trying that hard. Like, you're going to have 10 plus enchantment decks with regularity in white. There are enchantment creatures. All of the rooms also trigger Eerie twice. Every one of them can trigger Eerie at least twice because it does it when it enters, and then it does it when it gets unlocked. So that's even more counters. And it reminds me a lot, there was a 1 green mana 1/1 in Kamigawa Neon Dynasty who had basically the same effect. It was only when enchantments entered. It didn't care about doors, obviously. But that card ended up being insane. I mean, it's just so efficient to spend a single mana and then to just get counters the rest of the game. Like, this is a 1-drop that your opponent has to answer, and if they don't, things get out of control in a hurry. So it's a very, very strong card. One that you're going to first pick over most of the rares and mythics in the format. All right, let's move now to blue. I think blue's 3rd best common is Vanish from Sight. You know, I always end up talking about this card in the video I do, this kind of card, in the video I do on cards people are undervaluing, because these always end up having a pretty good win rate and getting taken pretty late. And by these, what I mean is a card that is a blue removal spell that puts the card on the top or bottom of your opponent's library. It's definitely not amazing. Obviously, it's only blue's 3rd best common, but it is pretty good. I mean, being an instant and 4 mana it's hard to be full-on premium removal, right? And there are frequently times where you cast this and your opponent doesn't have a good option for where to put their creature. There are times where you can do it and they really don't want to redraw another creature. But even when you do put it on top, as I always say about these, and it always bears repeating because the same thing happens in every format, it is still a 1-for-1 trade. People think of it like a bounce spell. It's not what it is, because you make your opponent draw the card again. And the Surveil upside on it's nice too. I think blue's 2nd best common, I've got another room here, and it is Meat Locker / Drowned Diner. So the Meat Locker side stuns a creature. So I talked about this some in the set review, but I guess it bears repeating here. I think most of the rooms that have, especially a cheaper side that impacts the board, are going to be playable or better. And the ones that don't aren't going to be very good. And most of the ones that don't are like rares and mythics, but there are a few lower rarity ones that aren't very good, going to be very good either. But this one does impact the board. It stuns a creature. It is a little awkward that we have survival in the format, and like, you kind of don't want to freeze down a creature that has survival. I mean, you can still get it out of the way as a blocker, but you're going to give it survival triggers, so you don't really end up ahead with that value here. But there are plenty of creatures that don't have survival, and you can stun them, and that makes a big difference. And then later in the game, once you reach the point where you're like, well, I don't have anything else left to do, you can spend 5 on Drowned Diner and draw 3 and discard a card. And that is pretty legit. I mean, that's an effect that is going to win you the game late a lot of the time. When you sort of reach a board parity position and you're like, oh yeah, I have Drowned Diner in play, time to unlock it. Like, that's going to change a lot of games, and that's a powerful thing a common can do. Meat Locker side would be better if it gave you a token or a manifest or something, but I can live with a card that at least sort of is pseudo-removal that then gives me card advantage later. So I like the look of Meat Locker a lot. And then I think blue's best common is Tunnel Surveyor. So just like the 4-mana 2/2 that makes a 2/2 token is always good, the 3-mana 2/2 that makes a 1/1 token is virtually always good. And like we saw with the 4-mana 2/2 that makes a manifest, this comes with extra synergy because the token that Tunnel Surveyor makes is an enchantment token. So you aren't running an enchantment in this case, but it is yet another card that can trigger Eerie. And it's just a good rate in general. 3 mana for a 2/2 and a 1/1. So, you know, it's going to slot into, you're going to play it in any deck, but if you're in like blue-white, which cares a lot about Eerie, you're really going to enjoy it. And then I think blue's best uncommon is Cursed Windbreaker. This one was close for me. I also like the 2 mana 2/1 flash merfolk that can stun a thing and then let you shuffle it back into their library. But I think I like the Windbreaker a little bit more. As I've already expressed, I think Manifest Dread is strong, especially when it's costed to move, and it definitely is here. You get to put a card in the graveyard, you put something into play that it very well may be a creature later in the game, and it has flying. and you keep the Windbreaker around to give your other stuff flying. I mean, obviously, if this was just an equipment that gave stuff flying for 3 generic at a time, it'd be terrible, but it gives you a body up front. The baseline here is Winddrake with upside, and it's like significant upside. You get 2 pieces of material, and you get an equipment that sticks around no matter what happens to your manifest. So, just looks like a lot of value to me. All right, let's move to black now. I think the 3rd best black common is Fear of Lost Teeth. 1-drops have been pushed a lot lately. We've already seen one in this video, the best white uncommon, for example, and this isn't nearly as good as that. But this looks really good to me because it ticks a bunch of boxes in the format. For one thing, 1 mana 1/1 that when it dies does 1 to any target. That as like a baseline is like a C- and maybe even a C. That's because it can trade up and kill X2s all on its own while gaining you a life. And if your opponent has 2 X1s in play, like, they can't really do anything because you 2-for-1 them in a big way. So that already is like a playable card. But it also has enchantment typing, which matters for all of the Eerie triggers and various other enchantment synergies in this set. It's also great sacrifice fodder, which matters for the black-red deck. And that enchantment type also matters because getting Fear of Lost Teeth in your graveyard gets you halfway to Delirium all on its own because it's an enchantment and a creature. And Delirium decks are a big thing in the format too. So it works in the sacrifice decks, it works in the enchantment decks, and it works in the Delirium decks really well. And it's just got this really nice, solid baseline to begin with. And don't forget, it can even go after your opponent. Sometimes a ping from Fear of Lost Teeth makes a difference there, too. Next up, I've got Winter's Intervention. I think that's the 2nd best black common. You know, it's not quite Savor, unfortunately. That common was insane. But it's kind of similar, right? Savor was 2 mana to give -2/-2 and make a food at instant speed. This is 2 mana for an instant that does 2 damage to a creature, and you gain 2 life. So you get more life immediately than you get from Savor, but it's less flexible than Savor, which can sort of operate as a combat trick. This doesn't work as well in that situation, but there are plenty of X2s in the format, including manifest creatures that this can kill at instant speed and efficiently, and gaining the life at the same time that you kill something, like especially if you're behind on board. That's like one of the best feelings in Magic, and even if you're just killing like a 3/2, but your opponent has you down to like 12 or 13, it makes a big difference. You know, you set them back on board and undo some of the work they did to your life total. So it's not insane. I don't even quite think it's premium. It wouldn't surprise me if it ends up being good enough. If creatures end up being small enough on average, the good creatures end up being small enough on average that Winter's Intervention ends up being even better. It wouldn't shock me, but going into the format, I'm not thinking it's like amazing, but I do think it's black's 2nd best common. And I think black's best common is Innocuous Rat, another manifest dread card. If you haven't picked up on it, I'm pretty high in the mechanic overall, especially when it's on cards that I would play anyway. We've seen 2 mana 1/1s that die into 2/2s, see plenty of play. There was one back in Amonkhet, and actually back in Fate Reforged, there was a 2 mana 1/1 that died into a manifest too, but it was regular manifest, which is not nearly as good as manifest dread. So we've seen this work out. It's just a good rate. I mean, if you just think about it, I paid 2 mana for a 1/1 and a 2/2. You'd do that every time. You don't get them at the same time, but that's fine. And Innocuous Rat is great sacrifice fodder for the black-red deck. It puts stuff in your graveyard for the black decks that care about that, like Delirium and Reanimator. And then it's just a really good rate where, you know, this, again, Manifest Dread is just so much better than original Manifest because A, there's a bigger chance that the thing you put into play is a creature, which means that 2/2 has a lot of future upside. And B, you put a card in your graveyard. That makes a big difference in a graveyard set. So I like Innocuous Rat a lot. And then I think black's best uncommon is Nowhere to Run. So if this was an instant 2 mana, target creature gets -3/-3 until end of turn, it would already be really good. That card always plays super, super well. It's premium removal, easy to trade up with, would already be a great card. But it does way more than that, partly by virtue of just being an enchantment. So this is a way to trigger Eerie at instant speed, and then, of course, all the other enchantment upside. You can sacrifice enchantments in the black-red deck, for example, and this is good sacrifice fodder because the main thing you want it to do is kill a creature, and you can sack it later. But it does also have an effect that shuts down Hexproof, which barely matters in the format. Ward does matter a little, certainly. So not having to pay ward costs to kill the things in the format that do have ward, gonna feel pretty good when you can do it. But yeah, it triggers Eerie, it's an enchantment in a set where that matters, you can sacrifice it, and it's just a great removal spell on the face of it. Let's look at red now. Man, red got a lot of really good removal with upside in this format. I think the third best red common is Impossible Inferno. This is the one I could see of these. Obviously, it's number 3, so it's the one I could see of these most likely not ending up on this list in the end, and that's just because it's kind of expensive. Normally, 5 mana, deal 6 at instant speed. It's like a C-. It's removal you'll play if you need to. If you don't have like any spells in your deck that can kill big creatures, sure, you'll stick an Impossible Inferno type card into your deck. But what pushes this well beyond being a C- is Delirium. And red is one of the Delirium colors in the format, especially when you pair it with green. But I think you'll be able to get Delirium reasonably well in like red-black too, even though that's an enchantment sacrifice deck. And when you do that, it turns into a 2-for-1. It does the whole red, exile the top card of your library, you can play it until the end of your next turn thing. And once it's a 5 mana, deal 6 that effectively draws you a card, that is miles better than a 5 mana, deal 6, full stop. So, yeah, it looks pretty good to me. You can't really run a bunch of them because they cost so much, but like I think the first one's going to make the cut pretty close to 100% of the time in most red decks. If you're like red-white, maybe you don't want it, you don't care that much about the graveyard, you're just turning your cards sideways. But pretty much every other red deck will be able to get Delirium at least some of the time, some of them quite easily, like red-green and red-black. So it's going to be pretty good. At number 2 for red, I have Scorching Dragonfire. This one is a reprint. 2 mana, deal 3s are, they're always great in limited. And the exile clause here really matters because this is a graveyard set, as I've mentioned numerous times. So permanently getting rid of whatever it is. Turning off its death trigger matters. I mean, we see more and more of those today. So cards that exile on removal are getting better and better because turning off death triggers is a big deal. And, keeping them from putting something in their graveyard that'll get them Delirium or whatever helps too. And then I think red's best common, it's a room, and it is Glassworks. So even if Glassworks was just a 3 mana enchantment that when it enters deals 4 damage to target creature an opponent controls, it might still be red's best common. That's because it is I've said this a lot, but it's an enchantment in a set where that matters. So that already is great. Then it deals 4. Then it's good sacrifice fodder, just like the black uncommon we looked at, because the main thing is you want to remove a creature with this. And then when you can sacrifice it for value, it's almost like getting 2-for-1. And then, because it's a room, obviously it has another door. And that other door, it's not good. The upside on this door isn't nearly as good as the blue room we looked at earlier that draws you cards. But when you have nothing else to do with your mana, which happens, especially once the board reaches parity, you spend all 5 on Shattered Yard, and now you have a thing that's pinging your opponent at the end of each of your turns. So that adds up, that pressures them even on a board that's stalled out, and it's like exactly what you want on a board that's stalled out because it gives you inevitability. Plus, there's all the stuff, triggers Eerie twice because it's a room. The blue-red deck is supposed to be a room deck. I have not a lot of confidence in that, as you know if you watched my archetype guide or my set review. But if it does turn out that that's legit, then this is going to be even better. And then I think red's best uncommon is Betrayer's Bargain. So all 4 of these are removal spells. I considered putting Ticket Booth on here. It's the room that manifests on one side, and then on the other side it gives an attacking creature double strike. That card I think is going to be pretty good. Maybe it ends up beating out Impossible Inferno. But I can't really see it beating out the other 2 cards that I have in the best commons. And obviously Betrayer's Bargain is an uncommon, and it's really, really good. It's another card where you're like, the worst case scenario is that it's a 4 mana, deal 5 at instant speed. That's a card you always play. These days it has gotten less impressive, as tricks have gotten better. Although I will say this format, maybe it's just coming out of Bloomborough where every color has an insane trick or 2. This set does not have as many tricks, so I do think removal is going to be a little bit better, certainly than it was in Bloomborough. But yeah, Betrayer's Bargain's floor, 4 mana, deal 5 at instant speed. But you can cast it for even cheaper if you sacrifice something. In which case you're paying 2 to deal 5 at instant speed, which that's an incredible card. It also has the exile clause that Scorching Dragonfire has. And there's lots of ways you can use this. You can sack something for value, which we've talked about with things like Rooms or the Innocuous Rat. Things like that are going to be like, basically you're getting additional upside alongside Betrayer's Bargain when you sack the rat. You can also, if your opponent is removing one of your creatures, just sack it and kill their best creature, because 5 damage is likely to do that. So, there are synergy things you can do, but it's going to be good in any red deck because you will find scenarios where it's easy to sacrifice something, and the floor on this is just really, really high. All right, let's move to green now. I think green's third best common is Bashful Beastie. 5 mana, 5/4 that dies into a 2/2 token. That's a card you feel pretty good about having at least one of in most of your green decks. But as I've already said, I don't need to say it again, at least not with any detail. Manifest Dread is way better than making a 2/2 token. So, moving on, Bashful Beastie just gives you good value. I think green's second best common is Spine Seeker Centipede. I always love like 3 mana 2/1s or 3 mana 1/2s that search up a land and put it into my hand. Like, that's just a good card. It helps you hit a land drop. It helps you fix, which in this format, there's a cycle of duels that make it easier for you to play a third color, and cards like Spine Seeker Centipede make it easier, too, to play, 2 or 3 cards of a third color. So if it ended there, I might still have it on this list because that card is just really good. But it gets better because it has Delirium and becomes a real creature, one that can actively attack and trade with way more expensive things once you get Delirium. Then I think green's best common is Monstrous Emergence. This card worries me a little because, one of the things about green removal that has sort of kept it in check, even when it's really efficient, is if your opponent can kill your creature in response, you get utterly blown out. And that has helped keep things from being too out of hand with green removal. That is not a risk here at all. And the reason for that is, you get this Rabid Bite effect, 2 mana for your creature to do damage equal to its power to another creature, except here you can reveal a card from your hand to have it do the damage. This means that in the early game, when you're like, man, I only have like a 1/3 in play, but they just played a 4/4, well, you can still kill the thing. So that's, that also is one of the downsides of Rabid Bite-like effects. If you don't have a big enough creature in play, they're kind of useless. So that also not a problem. But you can also, or actually you have to also, either reveal a card in your hand or choose your creature in play as part of the cost. And why does that matter? Well, because even if your opponent kills the creature in play that's going to do the damage, it still does the damage. They can't stop it because it was part of the cost, and the card checks to see what the most recent power of that creature is, and then it does that amount of damage, whether the creature's in play or not. So this does not have the downside we often see on fight effects. It is a pure, bite effect. It doesn't do anything else, but I think it's so efficient. Like, this is going to feel like Fell did in Bloomburrow. Just 2 mana sorcery, destroy target creature. That's how it's going to feel a huge chunk of the time. And so keep an eye out for that one. Do not kill your opponent's thing thinking you're going to 2-for-1 them either, because it's not possible anymore, unfortunately. Not with this one. So, and then I think green's best uncommon is Coordinated Clobbering. So this one also, like, super efficient. 1 green mana to have up to 2 of your creatures basically do damage equal to their power to an opposing creature. So normally in most sets, the fact that you have to tap each creature that's going to do the damage, it would be a downside. It wouldn't be a huge one because you're still spending 1 and you are most likely killing your opponent's creature for that amount of mana. But there are times where you just can't tap your stuff. But in this format, it can come with upside. And green has a lot of survival, and you're going to play a lot of the survival cards just in any green deck because a lot of them are just pretty good. So you don't have to be in the green-white survival deck to be doing it. And when you're doing that, it's going to feel, depending on the trigger, like the one that makes that manifests Dread in your second main phase if it's tapped. If you're getting that kind of trigger, this just becomes a 2-for-1. And, a 3-for-1 isn't even out of the question because some survival triggers are powerful enough to be worth a card of value in addition to the manifest one. You're not always going to do that, of course. I'm not saying, like, yeah, this is always going to get you a survival trigger. I'm not saying that. I'm saying the baseline here is 1 mana, destroy target creature in most cases. You do have to tap your things, but you might have some upside from tapping them too. So the baseline's good, and then it has some format-specific synergy that I think really pushes it over the edge. So those are my picks for the best commons and uncommons in the format. By next week, I'll have drafted the format probably about 10 times, and I'll have some early takeaways about how I'm feeling about the format, what I think you need to keep in mind to succeed in it and stuff like that. So, that does it for this video. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to like it and share it so that others can enjoy it too. And if you want to catch future videos, don't forget to subscribe. Thanks for watching.